Ailey of Skye, written by Wendy Hewlett, read by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. You've reached your destination in 50 meters. Oh, thank God, Aileen McEwen said to the GPS on her dash. After 24 hours of traveling, she couldn't wait for a nice hot shower, then a good 12 hours in the sack. She turned right off the A87 through a small opening in a short stone wall and got her first view of the small house her paternal grandmother, Moira McEwen, left to her, although she had never even met the woman. Her father had left the Isle of Skye, Scotland, in his early 20s and had never returned. She gave herself a month to stay here and decide whether she wanted to sell the house, convert it into a rental for the numerous hikers and climbers who visited the area to conquer the popular Hewlett Hills, or move here permanently. She sure as hell didn't want to go back to Toronto. Her first glimpse of the house brought a smile to her face. She'd been picturing a dilapidated ruin that may not even be livable, but her grandmother obviously kept the place well maintained. The windows appeared new, and the front door, periwinkle blue, featured a beautiful inlaid stained glass design of hummingbirds and bluebells. The cream walls were clean as if freshly painted, and a sloped roof appeared newly shingled. Flowers bloomed wildly along the front of the house and flowed out of window boxes in an array of bright colors. A large deck peeked around the side of the house and offered a lovely view of the loch. Aileen stepped out of the car and stretched her long, lean body as she turned to take in the view of the loch. The dark, rolling clouds were so low in the sky she thought she may be able to touch them as she stretched. She inhaled a deep breath of sea air and relaxed her tense shoulders. Why had her father been so hell-bent on leaving such a beautiful place? Maybe that was something she could figure out while she was here. But for now, she just wanted to get settled in and sleep. She pulled her 2 suitcases out of the trunk and dragged them to the front door, then fished around in her purse for the key the solicitor sent her. She stuck the key in the lock, turned it to the left, but didn't feel the deadbolt slide over. The door was unlocked. Frowning, Aileen turned the door handle, eased the door open, and was slammed with the thick, loud voice of an excited sportscaster with a thick Scottish brogue. She took a few tentative steps into the foyer and peered into the room on her left. A soccer match was in full swing on a large screen TV, and cheering on one of the teams was a dark-haired male sitting on a leather sofa with a beer in one hand and a sloppy sandwich in the other. Aileen looked back at the front door, then down at the key in her hand. It had to be the right house, as the key fit in the lock. "Excuse me," she called out. When she got no answer, she raised her voice. "Hello?" The man popped his head around, a surprised expression on his face. "Who the bloody hell are you?" Aileen perched her fists on her hips. "I'm Aileen McEwen." One dark eyebrow lifted. He took a long swing of beer and said, "Well, what the bloody hell are you doing here, then?" "This is my house, so what the bloody hell are you doing here?" The man stood, and Aileen guessed he had to be at least 6'4" of solid muscle. There was no way she could muscle him out of the door, although she'd give it a damn good try. "I'm buying the house, so I didn't see any reason not to move in." She had to pick her jaw up off the floor. "Well, you can just move out. This house isn't for sale." And he better do it quick. She needed to rest. He laughed, literally stood there and laughed at her. "I'll no be moving out, lass. I live here, do you ken?" "Do I what?" She shook her head and held up a hand. "Never mind. You have no right to be here. I own this house. Moira McEwen left it to me in her will." "Oh, I have a right to be here. Moira McEwen was my gran. I've been living here since she passed, and I'm staying." A thick, ropey vein pulsed in his neck, his face flushing to a bright red. This wasn't a good situation. He was as angry as she was, and God knew what he would do. She couldn't leave and go to a hotel, or she might never get the house back from him. Was he planning to contest the will? "How could Moira be your gran? My dad told me we were the only family she had left. Who are you?" He pursed his lips together, and his bright blue eyes flashed to the mantel over the stone fireplace for a brief moment. Aileen looked over at the mantel, lined with framed photographs. She went to move closer to it, and he stepped in front of her. "My name's Brody. Look, if you want to have a wee rest, there's a spare room at the top of the stairs. If you like, you can stay here until the sale of the house goes through, or you go back to Canada." So he knew who she was then. She was sure her face was as red as his now. She glared up at him with eyes the same deep blue as his and said through gritted teeth, "It's not for sale." Damn him. Her eyes burned and she forced back hot tears. She didn't come all this way to be pulled into selling the house. Brody grinned down at her. Oh, you're a feisty wee lass. Feisty wee lass? She was 6'9", albeit a little on the lean side, but that was beyond her control at the moment. No one ever called her wee. Feisty maybe, but not wee. Ugh! She growled, then stomped back outside, dragged her suitcases in, and slammed the door closed, cringing when she realized she could have broken the beautiful stained glass insert. When Brody reached for one of the suitcases, she ordered him not to touch them and heaved them both up the narrow staircase herself into the small room at the top of the stairs. How was she supposed to sleep now that he'd riled her up? God, she could use a drink. Eileen tossed and turned on the lumpy mattress, listening for Brody to come up the stairs and go to bed. What the hell had she been thinking, staying in a house with a man she didn't know? Her heart raced, pulsing in her ears. Who the heck moved into a house before they bought it? How dare he? She punched a pillow a couple of times, but it didn't help. The hot tears that threatened earlier flooded back. How was she supposed to deal with this alone in a strange country and stay sober? She swiped hot tears from her cheek and began the deep breathing exercises they taught her in rehab. By the fifth breath, she was starting to feel a little calmer, but she still wanted a drink. She wondered if they had an AA meeting on the Isle of Skye. She should probably check that out. Right after she went to see the solicitor who'd contacted her about inheriting her grandmother's house and a half-decent chunk of change along with it. She needed to find out who Brody was and why he thought he had claim to his grandmother's place. She couldn't have been his blood grandmother because her father told her they were the only family Moira McEwen had left. Aileen often asked her father why they never visited her, but he always waved her off. It was nearly 10 years ago that her dad died and left her with his bitch of a girlfriend. She still hadn't forgiven him, but she was working on it, part of the whole 12-step thing. She hoped she didn't have to forgive Brody, that bastard. She froze as she heard his footsteps on the stairs, hoping the chair she'd braced against the door was enough to keep him out, but he didn't even pause at the door as he passed by. She listened to him moving around, the toilet flushing and the sound of water running, and then she waited, listening to her own short, shallow breaths until she was sure he must be asleep. She had to force herself to move, to get out of the bed. Careful not to make a sound, she removed the chair at the door and crept down the stairs, keeping to the outside of the steps so they didn't creak. It was dark on the main floor, but Brody left a soft light in the kitchen that was enough for her to be able to make her way around. She checked the front door first, unlocking, then locking the deadbolt to be sure. Then she followed the walls, checking the windows were secure, making her way to the kitchen. She unlocked and locked the kitchen door, then made her way through the rest of the main floor, checking all windows before creeping back up the stairs. The chair was replaced, the back braced against the doorknob, and then she crawled back into bed, feeling infinitesimally safer. Okay, so first thing in the morning, she'd visit with the solicitor and find out what she had to do to get Brody out of her house. She could do this. By this time tomorrow, she'd be snuggled up in the big comfy bed she saw in the master bedroom, and Brody would be sleeping on a park bench for all she cared. She took a few more deep breaths, reminding herself everything was locked, and she was as safe as she could manage. Aileen was grateful Brody wasn't around when she woke up in the morning. She was able to shower and get dressed at her leisure. The only complaint she had was there was no coffee in the kitchen. She found a little cafe on her way to the solicitor's office, which was in a stone building that looked like it had been around for hundreds of years. She loved the texture of it, the huge stones with the white material filling in the thick cracks between them. It probably had been around for hundreds of years. There certainly wasn't anything this old where she grew up. A young woman with a mass of red hair sat at an antique desk in the reception area. The floors were old plank floorboards, buffed and polished to a high shine. Aileen gathered her long dark hair and pulled it over her shoulder, twisting her fingers around in the ends. "Hello," she said. The young woman with bright green eyes, a sprinkling of freckles across her nose, and a lovely smile looked up. "Hello. My name is Aileen McEwen. I'd like to speak to Mr. Browning." "Oh, you're from Canada. Welcome to Sconser. Did you find your way okay?" "Yes, thank you, but there was someone living in the house when I arrived. I need to speak to Mr. Browning about having him removed." The smile dropped from her face. "Oh, do you mean Brody?" "Yes, Brody." The woman picked up her phone, dialed a number, and turned around, giving Aileen her back. She whispered into the phone, then turned around again, smiled back in place, and hung up the phone. "Mr. Browning will be right out. Can I get you a cup of tea?" She would have preferred another coffee, but she was in Scotland after all. Sure, why not? She never got the cup of tea because Mr. Browning came out of his office with Brodie fast on his heels. "Miss McEwen," Browning said, "welcome to Scotland. I'm Alastair Browning. Why don't you come in and we'll see if we can work this matter out." He waved his hand toward the door he had just come out of. "What's he doing here?" Ailey asked, her fury from the night before resurfacing. "Please come inside and let me explain." He had a bit of a Scottish accent, but it was faint. Was the solicitor in on this too? Were they trying to rip her off? Oust her from her own damn house? "I'd like you to explain to Brodie that he has to move out of my house." Browning winced. "Are you not planning on selling it then, Miss McEwen?" "No, I'm not." She hadn't decided yet, but she damn well wouldn't tell them that. "I'm moving into it myself, and I want him," she stabbed her finger in Brodie's direction, "out." Browning and Brodie's eyes met, and Browning said, "Well, we have a problem then, don't we?" "There's no problem," Aileen huffed. "The house belongs to me. Brodie will just have to find somewhere else to live." Brodie rolled his eyes and spoke to Browning. "You see, she's no being very nice about it." "Come into the office, please, the two of you," Mr. Browning said with an exasperated sigh and walked through the door. Aileen glared at Brodie and marched after Browning. His office boasted the same high-sheen floors as the reception area. He lowered himself into a high-backed leather chair behind a monstrous antique desk with flamboyant, swirling patterns carved along the sides, while Aileen perched on the edge of one of the chairs facing him. "This is ridiculous, Mr. Browning. You sent me all of the documents. I own the house. Brodie has no right to it." "Aye, Miss McEwen, but he is your brother, and throwing him out on the street perhaps isn't the best solution." Aileen coughed, choked. Her hands went to her throat. "Brother?" Jesus! Was that really her voice? It sounded far too high. She turned at the hearty laugh behind her and narrowed her eyes at Brodie, leaning against the door jamb. Her chest tightened when she realized she was trapped in the room between the two men with no escape route. God, now that she looked at Brodie, he did resemble her father. In fact, he was the spit of him. Is that why Dad left Skye? Had he knocked Brodie's mother up and taken off? "Did he no tell you about us then?" Brodie asked. "No, I don't think he did, Us?" Aileen squeaked. "Were there more kids he left behind?" Brodie took a step into the office. "Aye, Ma and I. He stole you away from your own mother." Aileen rubbed her temples, a sudden headache pounding there. "No, that can't be. My mother died when I was very young." This was getting overwhelming. She really wanted a drink, even knowing it would only drown the pain and it would just make things worse. It always did. Why would her father steal her away from her mother and lie to her about it? It didn't make any sense. She looked up at Brodie. How did it make her feel when her father took off? How did it make him feel when his father took off with her and left him behind? Was he left with an abusive bitch like her dad's girlfriend? I don't understand. Da was in trouble. He ran with you instead of facing up to it. Brodie shrugged. Aye, a coward was our Da. You were on a plane and away before anyone knew he was gone. Poor Mr. Browning here spent a fortune on a private investigator to track you down. It took months, and we were all very surprised he hadn't changed your name. She knew about the private investigator, David Tyrone. He'd been her savior, quite literally. What kind of trouble? What kind of trouble was he in? Aileen wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Brodie's eyes were cold and hard. He was a gambling man and couldn't pay his debts. Oh, God. She should have known it had to do with gambling. No wonder he wouldn't come back to visit his mother. Aileen wrapped her arms around herself. She felt like she was sitting in a bucket of ice despite the sweat breaking out over her upper lip. That's enough for now, Browning said. I think Miss McEwen needs to go home and rest, Brodie. This is a lot to take in. You won't kick me out of the house, will you then, Ailey? Ailey? That was what her father called her. She looked up at Brodie again. Why had their grandmother left the house to her instead of Brodie anyway? Now she felt horrible about the whole thing. No, I won't kick you out. I'll get my things and move to a hotel until I can get a flight back home. She started to get to her feet and the room tilted. She fell back into the chair, grasping her spinning head. When had she eaten last? She couldn't remember. She picked at the meals they served on the plane, but that was very early yesterday morning.